All right. Thank you, Magdalena, for that lovely introduction and to what we are doing here and hope to do in Mars Society, Sweden. So, as you all just heard, I am an archaeologist. I specialize in the study of the Scandinavian Iron Age in particular, its ritual and religious life. So you might ask yourselves, what am I doing talking to you here tonight? How essentially do we get from historical Vikings to, say, NASA's Viking project, and onwards to the future that Mars Society is helping to shape? Well, as an archaeologist, I'm of course interested in how people lived in the past, but I'm also interested in how people will live in the future, for example, on Mars, and in how researchers, as Magdalena was just telling us, from the humanities and social sciences can, and I believe must, work together with natural scientists and engineers to help space exploration and settlement go forward and succeed, and to more fully explore and examine the different practical and ethical challenges these steps in our shared human future will entail, and in how going to Mars will also provide a new forum for addressing these issues on Earth as well. So I thought I would begin tonight exploring this exciting dynamic from both ends of space archaeology, so to speak. So to give you a quick taste of what space exploration is doing for archaeology, and also what archaeology can do for space exploration in general, and specifically to aid the human exploration and settlement of Mars. The most direct and immediate impact space exploration has had on archaeology thus far is the new methods it's offered us. Over the last few years, using satellite imagery has started to really come into its own as a hugely valuable remote sensing tool for finding and analyzing sites. Archaeologist Sarah Parshak, who you see posing here, pioneered this technique starting in the early 2000s when she started using close examinations of satellite images on both visible and infrared wavelengths to identify areas of moisture difference in the surface soils of the Egyptian desert. And these differences indicate, as you see here in this figure, the differences in moisture in the soil when enhanced through imaging technology can show you where mud bricks have been buried and thus reveal the foundation of vanished buildings. Ultimately, to date, she's discovered 17 new pyramids, the grid of the lost city of Tanis of Raiders of the Lost Ark fame, which is the image you see on the front slide of my presentation, and also thousands of other site traces. And since she first began in the early 2000s, she and her team at the Laboratory for Global Observation have been applying satellite archaeology to all kinds of projects around the world. She's published a textbook to help archaeologists employ this in their own projects, and also more recently a popular science work on the topic, which you see here. And she's also given a very interesting TED Talk that I would recommend if you all are interested in what she's doing to look up on YouTube. Where we are now in 2021, the field of satellite archaeology has really taken off. And not just Parshak and her associates, but researchers in many different countries are now working full or part-time as space archaeologists, regularly using satellites to discover and monitor archaeological sites, and working on how you use this technique in different environmental contexts. For example, in deserts, you're looking for the moisture signatures, as we said, but in places with vegetation, you're looking for crop marks, or in Arctic areas, you can be looking for different frost lines, or even chemicals bleeding out from shell middens or certain types of stones, which leave a telltale spectral signature. But of course, the real significance of this technology is how it's much faster and much cheaper than any of the currently available methods for surveying large areas in archaeology. And what I think is even more important and exciting about it is that satellite archaeology can really be, and increasingly is becoming, a really crowdsourced and democratic science. Parshak herself launched a software platform called Global Explorer, where internet users can look at high resolution satellite feeds of different archaeological sites and monitor them for looting. And really, even just open access tools as simple as Google Earth have opened up very significant research possibilities. Nowadays, anyone who's interested can look for hitherto unknown sites from your smartphone, and people are finding them. For example, in 2008, a neurologist and amateur archaeologist in Saudi Arabia was examining the desert on Google Earth and found what is known as the gates, about 400 stone structures that were built by nomadic tribes thousands of years ago. And just last year, a wedding photographer found the traces of this lost Neolithic hinge near the River Trent in England while he was combing Google Earth from his home in lockdown. There's so many exciting examples. I could go on all night, but we will move on to our other side of the discussion, which is what archaeology has in turn to offer to space. And one of the first things that comes to mind on this angle is we find the other kind of space archaeology, which is namely the archaeological study of human-made traces and items in space, ranging from orbital debris to astronaut footprints on the moon and the remains of probes and landers on Mars. Now, of course, this field is mostly theoretical just now, though actually the first space archaeological expedition has technically already taken place. And you see photos from it here when astronauts Charles and Pete Conrad and Alan Bean landed their Apollo 12 lunar module in 1969, close to where Surveyor 3 had soft landed in a crater 2 years ago. They made their way to the probe and took samples and brought the artifacts back to Earth to be analyzed and documented for how they'd changed since they'd been on the moon. And in 2016, a team led by New Mexico State archaeologist Beth O'Leary started a space archaeology project to study the legal ownership of artifacts and structures in space and how one might go about documenting and preserving them. And in 2018, the efforts for the nonprofit For All Moonkind, which includes space lawyers and policymakers from around the world, have led the United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space to consider the creation of a universal space heritage sites program. And of course, these issues of how to preserve the history of our exploration of space will become all the more poignant as humanity moves on to settle Mars and continue to blur the lines between what counts as national versus universal cultural heritage. And in addition to the cultural resource aspect, investigating the detritus of our space past can actually be, in a very concrete way, another key to better space exploration in the future, giving us access to new, or rather old, ideas for technological experimentation and trial and error. Essentially, we can get data about what went wrong without needing to wreck new crafts. For example, space heritage expert PJ Capilotti argues, as you see quoted here, that finding Cold War technology on the moon could lead us to find instrumentation and technology that was never announced, recorded, or used on Earth. But to me, what I think is the real contribution of archaeology to going to Mars is the fact that already, even without direct access to space junk, there is plenty that archaeological methods and theories provide to further Mars and other missions before we've even left Earth. Within the field of environmental humanities, archaeologists are increasingly looking to the past for insights into challenges we now face in our Anthropocene era today. In archaeology, we find analogies for many so-called no-analog situations, like how civilizations have adapted to rapid climate change in the past. There was a paper just published in January in the journal Nature, Ecology, and Evolution that discusses this, how by analyzing what worked and didn't work in the past, which effectively offers us long-term experiments in human society, archaeologists gain insight into the factors that support sustainability and resistance and the factors that work against them. They also highlight ancient solutions to modern problems. And much as we now have improve the modern world, are improving it by drawing upon information about the ways people in the past enriched soils, prevented destructive fires, created greener cities, and transported water without fossil fuels. These archaeological perspectives on economy, culture, growth, even collapse of societies can also be turned to the future. To the environmental and social challenges that will face settlers on Mars, such as how best to organize cities. The authors of the paper I just referenced has been looking at Angkor Wat as an example of how we might have greener cities in the future. And of course, when we talk about how to organize cities, we're talking not only on a concrete plane, but on how relationally people will work in not just cities, but also villages. So I suppose there we can I will leave the floor to Magdalena, who will be telling us more about what the past and the now can tell us about how we'll live on Mars in the future. So thank you. And here's some references that I can I guess you'll be able to look more later on YouTube if you want to look more into that. So thank you. Over to you, Magdalena.